Day they lowered my wife into the ground, the sky cracked open. Not rain, not yet. Just that heavy, pressing kind of grey that sits on your chest and won't move. I remember standing at the edge of the grave at Riverside Memorial Cemetery, holding my hat in both hands because I didn't know what else to do with them. 51 years with Eleanor. And now I was just a man standing in wet grass, watching a mahogany casket disappear into the earth, while a pastor said words I couldn't hear over the sound of my own breathing. My son was to my left. His wife, Natalie, was one step behind him. Always one step behind him, like she was waiting for the right moment to step forward. She was wearing black, which was appropriate. But the expression on her face wasn't grief. It was calculation. I noticed it the way you notice a draft in a room. You don't see it, you just feel it. And by the time you turn around to find where it's coming from, your bones are already cold. I told myself I was imagining things. A man buries his wife of 51 years. He's going to see shadows everywhere. I was wrong to tell myself that. Eleanor passed on a Tuesday in late October. Pancreatic cancer. The kind that gives you almost no warning and then takes everything in 6 months. We'd been planning a trip to Vermont to see the fall leaves one last time. She'd been talking about it since August. She never got to go. My son Preston flew in from Charlotte the day after she passed. He was 43 years old, our only child, and he worked in commercial real estate, a profession I'd always thought suited him because it required a certain talent for presenting things as more valuable than they actually were. His wife, Natalie, came with him. They had a daughter, Zoe, who was 6 years old, and the only person in that house who made me feel like myself those first few days. She'd climb into my lap and ask if Grandma was with the stars now. And I'd say, yes, sweetheart, she's with the stars. I live in a 4-bedroom house in Raleigh, North Carolina. Eleanor and I built it in 1989. We raised Preston here, planted the oak tree in the backyard together, repainted the kitchen 3 times because Eleanor could never quite find the right shade of yellow. The house is paid off. I have a pension from 32 years working as a civil engineer for the county, a modest investment portfolio, and a commercial property on the east side of town, a small strip mall I bought in 2003 that still generates about $6,800 a month in rental income. I'm not a wealthy man, but I'm a man who planned carefully and spent carefully, and because of that, I'm comfortable. Preston knew this. He'd always known this. Natalie had recently started to know it very well. They stayed for 2 weeks after the funeral. I was grateful for the company at first. The house felt enormous without Eleanor. I find myself standing in the kitchen at 7 in the morning, waiting for the sound of her slippers on the tile, and then I'd remember, and the silence would hit me like a door. Preston helped me with paperwork. Death generates an extraordinary amount of paperwork, insurance forms, bank account transfers, deed updates, notifications to Social Security. I have mild arthritis in my right hand, a fact that became significant later. Some days the pen felt like I was writing through wet cement. It was during that second week that I first heard Natalie on the phone. I'd gotten up at 2 in the morning for a glass of water. The kitchen light was on. I stopped in the hallway when I heard her voice, low and quick, the way people talk when they don't want to be overheard. The strip mall alone is worth at least $1 million, too. Plus the house. He's 67, Preston. Do the math. We can't just wait around hoping he does the right thing. I stood there in the dark for a long time. I didn't go in for the water. I went back to bed, stared at Eleanor's side of the mattress and thought about what the right thing meant to a woman like Natalie. She started small. That's how these things always start. First it was suggestions. She thought it might be easier for me to move somewhere with less upkeep, maybe a 55-plus community over in Cary. Very nice, lots of amenities. She'd done some research. I thanked her and said I was fine where I was. Then came the concerns. She'd noticed I'd left the stove on once. I was tired, I forgot. It happens. She mentioned it 3 times over the next 4 days, each time in front of Preston, each time with this particular softness in her voice that wasn't actually soft at all. I just worry about you, Dad. She'd started calling me Dad after the funeral. She never called me that before. Then came the doctor. She'd made an appointment for me, she said, just a checkup. Very routine. I went because I didn't see a reason not to. It was a doctor I'd never met, not my regular physician of 15 years, Dr. Mai Harmon, but someone new, a geriatric specialist whose office was 40 minutes away. The appointment lasted 90 minutes. I answered questions, did some memory exercises, drew a clock, standard cognitive screening. 2 weeks later, Natalie mentioned very casually over dinner that the doctor had some concerns. What kind of concerns? I asked. Oh, nothing alarming, she said, not looking up from her plate. Just with everything you've been through, the grief, the stress, he thinks it might be worth monitoring. I called Dr. Harmon the next morning. He'd received no report. No one had contacted his office. The geriatric specialist's notes, when I finally requested them myself, said nothing more than what any 67-year-old grieving man might expect. Slightly elevated stress markers, recommendation for regular exercise, follow-up in 6 months. There was no concern. There was nothing alarming. Natalie had invented it. I sat with that for a few days. I didn't say anything. I started paying attention differently. Preston and Natalie extended their stay. Then extended it again. My son started working remotely from my dining room table. Natalie redecorated the guest bedroom, bought new curtains, new bedding, moved some of Eleanor's things to the garage to give the room some air. I found a box of Eleanor's books stacked next to the lawnmower, and I stood there in the garage for 10 minutes, unable to move. We just think it makes more sense for us to be here right now, Preston told me. You shouldn't be alone. He wasn't wrong that I shouldn't be alone. But that's not what this was. Zoe was the only honest thing in the house. She'd take my hand and walk me to the backyard, and we'd look at the oak tree, and she'd tell me about her kindergarten class and the boy named Theodore who ate his crayons. I looked forward to those walks more than anything else in my day. Whatever was happening between the adults in that house, Zoe was untouched by it. She was just a little girl holding her grandfather's hand. I started keeping notes. A small notebook I kept in the breast pocket of my cardigan. Dates, times, things said. I'd been an engineer for 32 years. I understood documentation. I understood that the difference between something that can be proven and something that can be dismissed is a paper trail. The first time Preston brought up the power of attorney, I thought I'd misheard him. We were watching a football game, Panthers versus Saints, November, a Sunday. He'd been building up to something all day. I could feel it the way you feel weather changing. Dad, he said during the second quarter, Natalie and I have been talking. We think for your protection, just in case, it might make sense to think about getting some estate documents updated. I turned down the volume. Updated how? Well, you've got the strip mall, the investment accounts, the house. It's a lot to manage. And with your hand being what it is, my hand works fine. I know, Dad, I know. But if something were to happen, if you had a bad day and needed someone to step in, I have an attorney, I said. Walter Briggs has handled my estate documents for 11 years. Everything is current. I know about Walter, Preston said. He said it a certain way. Like Walter was an obstacle. I just think it might be worth having a conversation. I said I'd think about it. That was all I said. That night, I called Walter Briggs. Walter had been my attorney since before Eleanor got sick. He was 71, semi-retired, sharp as anyone I'd ever met. I'd updated my will the previous spring quietly, without telling Preston. Eleanor and I had discussed it at length. The house would go into a revocable trust. The strip mall would be managed by a property management company, and the income split between a charitable fund we'd established and a college savings account for Zoe. Preston would receive a cash inheritance, significant, generous, but not control of the income-producing assets. We'd made that decision together, Eleanor and I, because we knew our son, and we knew who he'd married, and we loved him enough to protect him from his own worst instincts. Walter already had everything. Signed, notarized, filed. I told him what was happening. He listened without interrupting, which was one of the things I valued about him. All right, Ted, he said when I finished. He always called me Ted. My full name is Theodore, but only my mother had ever used it. I think we need to meet in person, and I think you need to do a few things before that meeting. He told me what to do. I did all of it. Natalie escalated. In December, she found a buyer for the strip mall. She didn't ask me. She presented it. A developer who wanted to tear down the building and put up condominiums. She had a number ready. It was below market, and she said it was a strong offer. She had a one-page summary printed out and slid across the kitchen table to me like we were in a boardroom. "I haven't asked to sell the strip mall," I said. "I know, but this kind of offer doesn't come around often." "Natalie." I looked at her. "I haven't asked to sell anything," she smiled. Not a warm smile. The kind of smile that acknowledges it heard you and doesn't care. Preston came in from the other room. I wondered how long he'd been standing there. "Dad, just look at the numbers." "I have an accountant and an attorney," I said. "If I decide to sell any of my property, I'll have them look at the numbers." That night I heard them arguing in the guest room. I couldn't make out the words, but I could make out the tone. Natalie's voice, tight and hard. Preston's voice, lower, hesitant. The voice of a man being pushed somewhere he wasn't sure he wanted to go, but going anyway. The holidays were the worst. I don't say that lightly. I've had bad holidays. The December my father passed. The Christmas Eleanor was in the hospital with pneumonia in 2009. But this one had a particular quality to it, because the threat was invisible, and I was living inside it. Zoe put ornaments on the tree, and I watched her and thought about Eleanor, who had bought most of those ornaments over 50 years. And I thought about how a house that should have been full of grief and memory and love had been turned into something else entirely. A transaction. A negotiation. I called my brother in Phoenix on Christmas Eve. Douglas is 72, retired Navy, straight talker. I told him everything. He drove in from Phoenix in January. Douglas spent 4 days. He didn't announce why he was coming. I just told Preston and Natalie that my brother was visiting, which was true. Douglas is the kind of man whose presence in a room changes the temperature of the room. He's not aggressive. He's just certain, and certainty has a weight to it. He watched. He listened. He took Zoe to the park while the adults talked, and he came back and looked at me with an expression I recognized from when we were boys, the expression that meant, "This is worse than you told me." The night before Douglas left, Preston and Natalie went to dinner. Douglas and I sat at the kitchen table with 2 cups of coffee, and he said, "Ted, what are you waiting for?" I told him I had a plan. He asked me what I needed. I told him by the time he drove back to Phoenix, what I needed was in motion. Walter called me in mid-January and told me everything was ready. There was one more thing I needed to do. It was the hardest thing. I sat down with Preston. Just the 2 of us. A Sunday morning, Natalie had taken Zoe to the farmer's market, but poured coffee, and I looked at my son, and I tried to find the boy I'd raised. The boy I'd driven to baseball practice and helped with calculus and watched walk across the stage in a cap and gown. He was in there somewhere, I believed that, but he'd been living inside Natalie's plans for so long that I wasn't sure how deep he was buried. "I know what's been happening," I told him. "I know about the calls. I know about the doctor you didn't tell me was your idea. I know about the developer who made that offer 48 hours after Natalie mentioned to him that the property might become available soon." Preston's face went through several things in about 4 seconds. "I'm not angry," I said, and that was the truth, which surprised me. I wasn't angry. I was tired, and I was sad, and I was grateful that Eleanor hadn't lived to see this. But I want you to know that I know, and I want you to think about what you're doing and why you're doing it. Because when this is over, I'm still your father and you're still my son, and that doesn't have an expiration date. But what happens in the next few weeks is going to matter for a long time." He didn't say much. He said he was sorry. I didn't know if he meant it. I still don't. 2 days later, he told Natalie to arrange a family meeting. He told her it was time to talk about the estate. She thought it was her idea. The meeting was set for a Saturday in late January. Natalie had put together an agenda, an actual printed agenda, which I found on the kitchen counter. She'd accidentally left it face up, or maybe she wanted me to see it. The strip mall sale was item 2. A care plan for me was item 3. Transferring management of the investment accounts to Preston was item 4. She'd also invited her mother and her brother, which I found interesting. Witnesses, or I wasn't sure which. I'd invited Walter. When the doorbell rang at 10:15 on a Saturday morning, Natalie assumed it was her mother. She went to the door herself. Walter was standing on my porch in his coat and hat, briefcase in hand, and I watched from the hallway as Natalie's expression shifted, just for a second, from expectation to something she quickly controlled. "This is Ted's attorney," Preston said from behind her. His voice was quiet. Natalie regained her composure quickly. She smiled, that same cold, measured smile, and stepped back to let Walter in. We sat in the living room. Natalie's mother and brother arrived 10 minutes later, and the room had the particular tension of a space where everyone thinks they know what's about to happen, and half of them are wrong. Walter set his briefcase on the coffee table and opened it. "Ted asked me to be here today to review the current state of his estate documents," he said, in the way he'd said things in courtrooms and conference rooms for 45 years. Calm, unhurried, with the authority of a man who has no reason to perform. "I want to start by walking everyone through the will and trust structure as it stands." Natalie leaned forward slightly. This was the part she'd been waiting for. She'd spent months getting to this room, to this moment, to the part where the numbers were finally on the table. Walter placed a document in front of Preston. The house, he explained, was held in a revocable trust. It would remain in the trust for the duration of my life. After my passing, it would be sold and the proceeds divided, half to Preston, half to a charitable foundation Eleanor and I had established in her name, supporting pediatric cancer research at UNC Hospital. Preston's half was designated to be held in a sub-trust until he turned 55, managed by an independent trustee, to be distributed in annual installments rather than as a lump sum. Natalie's smile didn't change, but something behind her eyes did. "The strip mall," Walter continued, "would transfer to a professional property management firm upon my death, with the rental income continuing to fund Zoe's education trust, which I had established directly in Zoe's name, not Preston's, not Natalie's, and a second charitable fund. Preston received a direct cash bequest, generous, unconditional, enough to matter. But there was no power of attorney going to Preston, no management of accounts, no sale of the strip mall, nothing that required my signature while I was still living, nothing that transferred any control to anyone while I was still in this house." Natalie set down the document she'd been holding. She set it down the way you set something down when your hands need to do something while your mind is catching up. "When was this will drafted?" she asked. Her voice was perfectly level. "The most recent update was executed last April," Walter said. 11 months ago. Witnessed and notarized, entirely valid. Before Eleanor passed," I said. It was the first time I'd spoken since Walter began. "Before any of this, Eleanor and I made these decisions together. This is what she wanted. This is what we both wanted." The room was quiet. Natalie's mother was looking at her hands. Natalie's brother was looking at the wall. Preston was looking at me with an expression I hadn't seen on his face in a long time. Something young, something uncertain, something uncertain, something that might have been shame. "There's one more thing," Walter said. He reached into the briefcase and removed a sealed envelope. He handed it to Preston. "Your father asked me to deliver this to you today in this setting. You can open it now or privately. That's your choice." Preston looked at me. I nodded. He opened it. Inside was a letter I had written by hand in December during one of the nights I couldn't sleep. 3 pages. I told him about the night I heard Natalie on the phone. I told him about the doctor. I told him about the doctor. I told him about standing in the garage next to the box of his mother's books. I told him that I loved him without condition, but that love without honesty is just politeness, and I was too old for politeness. I told him that his mother had loved him the same way, and that she would have said the same things if she were here, and she wasn't here, so I was saying them for both of us. I told him that Zoe's education was fully funded, that she would never want for anything I could give her, that whatever happened between us, she would always be my granddaughter, and I would always be her grandfather, and that was not negotiable. Preston read all 3 pages. His shoulders, halfway through the second page, dropped in a way I hadn't seen in months. Natalie reached over and put her hand on his arm. He didn't take her hand. When he finished, he folded the letter carefully and held it in both hands. and didn't say anything for a while. "Dad," he finally said. His voice was different, scraped clean of something. "I know," I said. Natalie and her family left within the hour. Preston stayed. We sat in the kitchen, the two of us, and drank coffee the way we used to on Sunday mornings when he was in high school. And the house was quiet, and Eleanor was reading in the other room. I could almost hear her turning pages. He asked me what happened to us. I told him I thought he already knew the answer to that, but that the answer wasn't permanent unless he decided it was. He asked about Zoe. I told him about the education trust, all of it, every detail. I told him she was my granddaughter and nothing would change that. I watched something unlock in him when I said it. We didn't fix everything that afternoon. I won't pretend that a conversation undoes years. But we started. You have to start somewhere, and the only place you can start is where you are. He called me 3 days later, from Charlotte. Natalie had gone to stay with her mother. He didn't explain it beyond that. He said he'd been thinking. He said he was sorry, and this time when he said it, it had weight, the kind of weight that comes from actually meaning something. I said I knew. I said I was glad he called. Outside the kitchen window, the oak tree Eleanor and I planted in 1989 was bare for winter, but the branches were still there, still reaching, and in a few months they would have leaves again. Things that look finished sometimes aren't. That's what I've learned. That's the thing I keep coming back to. In the evenings when the house is quiet, and I'm in the chair by the window, and I'm talking to Eleanor in the way you talk to someone who isn't there anymore, but somehow still is. I tell her we did all right, the two of us. I tell her Zoe is fine. She's more than fine. I tell her the yellow in the kitchen still isn't quite right, but I think I finally found the one she was looking for. I've been sitting with this for a while now, trying to find the right way to say it. Not the tidy version, the true one. What happened in that living room on a January Saturday wasn't magic. It wasn't luck. It was the result of a very simple thing. I paid attention when everyone assumed I had stopped. That's it. That's the whole secret. Natalie believed that grief had made me soft, that age had made me slow, that a man who cried at his wife's grave was a man who could be moved in any direction she chose. She was wrong, and the reason she was wrong is that she confused emotion with weakness. Those are not the same thing. I have never once believed they were the same thing, and I hope I never do. Eleanor used to say that the clearest sign of a person's character is what they reach for when they think no one is watching. Natalie reached for my assets the morning after the funeral. Preston reached for her hand instead of his conscience. For a while anyway. I reached for a notebook and a phone and attorney I'd trusted for 11 years. We all revealed ourselves. That's what pressure does. It doesn't change who you are. It just makes it harder to hide it. I think about the choices I made in those months, and I don't regret the hard ones. I regret the soft ones. The times I stayed quiet when I should have spoken. The times I told myself I was imagining things to avoid a confrontation I wasn't ready for. Wisdom isn't knowing what's right. Most people know what's right. Wisdom is finding the courage to act on it before the window closes. I almost waited too long. Not quite, but almost. Zoe's education fund is something I think about every time I see that little girl. She didn't ask to be born into the middle of any of this. She didn't choose her parents or her circumstances or the conversations that happened behind closed doors while she was at the park. She just held my hand and told me about Theodore, who ate his crayons, and trusted that her grandfather was a safe place. I owed her that safety. I owe it to her still. Whatever fractures exist between the adults in this family, she will not feel them. That is a decision I made, and I will keep making it. Preston called again last week. We talked for 40 minutes. I don't know yet what his marriage looks like from the inside or what choices he'll make going forward. I know he's my son. I know Eleanor loved him with everything she had. I know that a person can spend years making the wrong choices and still turn around, not because the past disappears, but because the future is still unwritten and the pen is still in your hand. I don't have a grand philosophy about how life works. I'm a 67-year-old man who misses his wife and has arthritis in his right hand and finally found the yellow for the kitchen. What I know is this: the people who try to take things from you by making you feel small are counting on you to believe them. Don't. Document everything. Call your attorney, write the letter, plant the tree and tend it for 35 years, and trust that the roots go deeper than anyone trying to cut it down ever bothered to check. Eleanor knew. She always knew.